Hello everyone. In the previous videos you saw ways of saving data between scenes. Now I will talk about some of the ways in which you can save data between gameplay sessions. This will be useful for saving high scores, player details, mission progressions, etc. And the first method that I will talk about is PlayerPrefs. PlayerPrefs is a convenient way to save data between sessions. It is very easy to implement and is cross-platform, which means it is going to work similarly on the common platforms like PC, mobile, or web. Player prefs are actually a key value pair stored at a predetermined location on your system. Unity will automatically handle saving and retrieving of the data. To get or set a saved value, you only have to call the set or get functions using the key associated with that value. Here are some of the locations where your player prefs will be stored, and this depends on the platform on which your game is built. The supported types are float, int, and string, but with a little bit of extra coding, it's possible to save other data types like bool. To demonstrate the use of player prefs, I have made a very simple setup inside Unity. The thing that I want to save is the player high score, and when I restart my game, I want to retrieve that saved high score using player prefs. In this example, I am saving the high score as an integer, but remember that the functions to save and retrieve a float or a string value are very identical and the basic process will remain the same. In the Unity scene, I have a simple text UI component which will show the retrieved high score. I have an input field and a save high score button, and using this we are going to save a new high score value. Now I have created a PlayerPrefs test script, and I have just linked my input field to a getScore function which will convert the string inside my input field to a proper input integer value, and I have linked the button to a save function which is right now not doing anything. It is just showing a debug message, but we will write the function to save that value later. As I said earlier, player prefs are actually key value pairs where key is of the type string and it is an identifier to the value that is stored using player prefs, and the value can be of the type int, float, or string. Now to create a new player pref to store a new value, you must create a new key. And a good practice to create a new key is to write it like this. Now the benefit of using a constant string instead of directly writing the string every time you want to retrieve the value is that it is less prone to spelling mistakes in the player prefs. And also, since it is a constant, you are sure that it won't be accidentally changed when the code runs. Now the actual PlayerPrefs function to save your value is very simple. You just have to write PlayerPrefs, which is directly inside the Unity engine namespace, dot set int. And the first parameter it needs is the key value, which we have set as high score key. And the next parameter it takes is the actual value, which we can give it the input score value. Now, if there already exists a player pref with that key value, with that key, it will overwrite that stored value with any new value that you are inputting. And suppose in our case, we won't have a player pref because we have not ever saved any value, saved any high score value. In that case, it will create a new player pref save location and save our input score using this new key. Here, if you wanted to save a float value, the function and the process is exactly the same. You can use the set float function, provide it a new key and your float value. The function to save a string is also similar. Set string, give it a key, a string, and your string value. Now once we have saved the value, the function to retrieve that value, which in our example we will just in our start function retrieve the saved value and update the text UI component in our scene. This text component saved high score. We will update this text component based on the high score that is saved as player prefs. So the function to retrieve any saved value is player prefs dot get float, get int, or get string based on the type of value that you have saved with a particular key. In our case, we are saving a int, so we will use player prefs dot get int. It needs the your key, which in our case is our high score key, and it also has an overloaded function in which you can specify a default value. And this is useful in cases where if you have not ever set your high score value, you have not saved any high score value. In that case, if the player pref doesn't exist, that means there are no saved high score. In that case, it will just return the default value which you have set in this function. This function will return the value with the proper type. In this case, it is returning an int value. So we'll create a new int variable to save that returned value. We can just name it saved high score. And now the only thing left is to update our text UI component to see what is the saved value, which we can do by simply writing highscore.text. In the scene, we have already given our script a reference to the text UI component, and we have also linked the input field and the button to the proper function. Now, if you want to know in details about how input fields or buttons are linked to your script, you can check my video series on Unity GUI, whose link will be in the description below. Now, when we go into the play mode, it will try to retrieve the saved data. But in our case, we haven't ever set a high score value. So it is returning 0 and we see the text as saved high score 0. Now let's try to save a new high score. Let's say 100, and after clicking on the save high score, it will call the function here, save function, which calls the player prefs.setInt function at it, and it saves the 100 value, which is the input score using the high score key. Now if I go outside of our play mode and restart the scene, which means I have restarted my game, and it is after my games one game session has ended and now I am into a new game session. Now when I will go into the play mode, it will first try to retrieve the saved high score value, and it should be equal to the value that we have just saved, which was 100. So now when I go into the play mode, it gets the correct saved value. I can even close my Unity project, or if I have build the game into an actual exe file, I can restart my exe and the player pref value would be uh, correctly saved. So let's try to save a new high score, go outside of our play mode, and then again when the start function is called, you can see that saved the saved high score value has been updated. Data stored using PlayerPrefs lives across gameplay sessions, and so by default, it also lives across your Unity scenes. So you can also use PlayerPrefs to pass data between different Unity scenes. So I can restart my same scene, and you will see that the PlayerPref data is still intact. So this was the basic workflow of saving and retrieving data using player prefs. You first define a key of the type string, and then use the setInt or setFloat or setString function to save your data and use the get version of that type to get your data. There are some other functions which you might find useful in the PlayerPrefs class. The first one is your PlayerPrefs.deleteAll, which will delete all the key and value pairs inside your system. So every data will be erased. The next function is your player.deleteKey. Here you can specify a particular key and Unity will remove all the data which is stored using that key. So if I supply it with my high score key, it will delete my value which is stored using the high score key. The last function inside the PlayerPrefs class is your PlayerPrefs.save. What happens is that Unity will not immediately save the data that you have set using PlayerPrefs.setInt function. The actual writing to the disk or your data being permanently saved on the disk happens when you close your game and when the on application quit functions are called. So in cases in which your game accidentally crashes, or in the cases in which your on application quit function is not called, your data will not actually be stored permanently on the disk. So the playerprefs.save function is used to manually permanently save your data which you have set using playerprefs.setInt function. Now this function uh, is very heavy, so it will cause a small hiccup during gameplay. So it is advised to use it at a very particular location. For example, at a new level or at some checkpoints on which there is a small pause in the gameplay, so you can utilize that pause to save the player prefs values onto your disk. So this was an overview of player prefs. Player prefs are great because they are very easy and simple to use. But the one downside of using player prefs is that you are only limited to few data types like a string, float, and int. You are not able to save complex data structures or even save data directly from your classes or objects. And this is exactly what we will be looking in our next video, where I will show you how you can save your entire objects directly and permanently onto your system.